Now that the dust has settled, we have more details on the biggest acquisition in gaming history. Yesterday, Microsoft announced what could only be described as an asteroid hitting the gaming community. It was a cataclysmic event of Microsoft announcing that they're going to be paying $70 billion dues for Activision. This is throwing everything into turmoil. There's been a lot of craziness going on. And now that the dust has started to settle on this and executives are doing interviews and there's more details coming out, and I've had some time to poke around, we have some more information that sort of highlights and helps us understand what is going to be happening with the largest acquisition in gaming history. So let's just get started with exclusivity. So when it comes to exclusivity, everyone's thinking, hey, Microsoft's going to rip all these titles out and put them exclusively on Xbox. Now, that is not going to be the case. Actually, Phil Spencer has come out and said, I'll just say to the players out there who are playing Activision Blizzard games on Sony's platform, it is not our intent to pull the communities away from that platform, and we remain committed to that. That should not come as any surprise to anyone. First up, keep in mind, they are paying nearly $70 billion for Activision. They have to make money to justify that expenditure. They can't just spend that and then clam it all up inside of Xbox. That's not going to fly, and Microsoft has to make money. Second of all, Microsoft is in the business of making games. Yes, they sell consoles, and yes, they do other things, but most importantly, they want their gamers playing games, and they don't really care what platform. Yes, they want everybody on Xbox. Yes, they want everybody in Game Pass, but for the time being, as Microsoft continues its narrative of trying to become the Netflix of gaming, they have to make sure that they are keeping and maintaining a good relationship with gamers, and that means not pulling every single title off of PlayStation. Now, there will absolutely be exclusives that are going to bring, push people towards the Xbox narrative, but I can't see them taking Call of Duty away, because that title brings in at least $1 billion every fall, and that would be a huge hit to the value of the brand every single year. Also, keep in mind, Microsoft has done a pretty good job of bringing its own games to other platforms. Look at Minecraft as a perfect example. We see Minecraft all over the place. Microsoft is going to continue that narrative. Keep in mind that the end focus is to get people into Game Pass, not necessarily to buy an Xbox console. I don't necessarily mean that's going to bring Game Pass to PlayStation, but keep in mind that there's multiple ways to access Game Pass, and they're not going to go and try to upset the massive user base of Call of Duty, as an example, and just strip it away. Now, there will be things that do go away. For example, I would fully expect right now, PlayStation typically has an exclusivity on either maps or guns or weapons related to Call of Duty launching on that platform first. I would fully expect that type of exclusivity to go away, and you would have feature parity at minimum on Xbox. Would not surprise me if there's exclusive times on Xbox or at guns or features or skins in that sort of way, but just keep that in mind. Second, it's kind of crazy to say this, Microsoft already has a pilot program in place that kind of shows how to do these mega acquisitions. It is crazy to say this, but Microsoft's Bethesda acquisition that was around $7.5 billion, which is roughly a tenth of the Activision deal, has been a pilot program for Microsoft's mega acquisitions. They were able to acquire Bethesda, bring the assets in-house, and launch multiple Quad A games. So when they go to acquire acquire Activision, which is hard to say, we can look at what they've done with Bethesda as a blueprint if you're wondering how Microsoft is going to play this deal out. It's a really important point for them to make sure that they continue to keep a broad approach to the titles, because they want to become the Netflix of gaming, which leads into our second point of Microsoft getting aggressive. Not that Microsoft wasn't aggressive previously, but poking around the inside bits here, Microsoft employees and insiders are saying that Microsoft views their position right now as a once in a generational opportunity. Now, what I mean is go back a few years and look at actual Netflix, just plain Netflix. That was a once in a generational timeline. They had the timing right. They got the content. They had the model down. Microsoft believes it's in a position right now to truly become the Netflix of gaming, which means they have to go aggressive. Now is not the time to be passive. And how do they do that? They need titles and they need content. And what's the best way to do that is just to go out and buy the big name brands. And Microsoft is willing to go all in on this, which is what we are seeing with Activision, to make sure that they solidify themselves that Game Pass is the premier solution for games as a service. We know that Sony is launching it. Phil Spencer even commented on it. Amazon's going down a similar route. Facebook wouldn't be surprising. Stadia is out there as well. So Microsoft sees a ripe marketplace and that they are the market leaders right now, and they are going all in to make sure that they maintain that dominant platform position with Game Pass, which is why we see them being so aggressive and willing to spend $70 billion. Now, Speaking of actual dollar dues here for a second, at the end of last quarter, Microsoft had about $130 billion in the bank, meaning that when they spend $70 billion on Activision in roughly 18 months or so. Keep in mind, this deal is not going to close until June of 2023. That is the expectation. Microsoft will be spending about half of its current war chest on this acquisition, which is a huge deal. Now, keep in mind, I just said 18 months. There's several quarters in there. Microsoft brings in multiple billions of dollars per quarter, so they will have more money by the time they make this purchase. But just keep in mind that Microsoft is spending about half their war chest, which at the same time is also crazy that $70 billion is half of what they have in the bank. The other interesting thing to think about here is why now? And there's a lot of talk about, did Microsoft actually get Activision at a discount? Now, that's kind of crazy to think about at, again, $70 billion dues. But if you go back in time, and because Activision is a publicly traded company, you can actually see their value. Now, we all know what is going on over at Activision. They find themselves in a really tough position, self-inflicted tough position, by the way. They have a CEO, Bobby, that nobody appears to like ever. They also are under scrutiny from regulatory inside of the state of California. And so their stock price has dropped quite a bit, actually. It was down pretty low. Now, it is popped up because Microsoft is going to be paying $95 a share, but Microsoft actually kind of got them a little bit at a discount. And you might be saying, but Brad, $95, that's actually more now than when, what it's actually at, because it's at the low 80s right now, somewhere between, depending on when you look at the stock market, low 80s is what we're seeing right now. Microsoft is paying 85 or 95. But the way that's how it works, though, Microsoft has to pay a premium on the stock price to be able to get shareholders to buy in. Otherwise, they don't come away feeling like a winner. So Microsoft is paying a premium, which puts them in the mid 90s. But if you go back and look at their stock prices, from last summer, it was already in the 90s, which means they would have had to be paying tens of billions of dollars more potentially to get that premium. So both companies are saying, nah, we didn't get them at a discount. But if you're Microsoft and you know that you need these big name titles, you see what's happening to Activision, and you kind of can come in and not, hero is the wrong word, but scoop them up at a value. It's not a bad thing necessarily. Now, both companies are saying like, no, this wasn't a value thing. But Bobby was saying in an interview, I believe it was CNBC, he said, when we started to look at it, because they were supposedly going to be looking at outbidding Zynga for a recent acquisition, but it just kind of made sense to get acquired by Microsoft because the gaming world is changing dramatically. You need a cloud, you need a back end. You're not just competing with gaming platforms, you're not competing with companies like Tencent, with Google, with Facebook, who have these massive data centers and they have big infrastructure setups. And for a gaming company, that can be quite hard to compete. And so with that narrative, I actually tend to agree that, yeah, gaming is evolving about what you actually have to be a huge studio these days. It's not just about games, it's about having infrastructure, which is something that Microsoft currently excels at. Now, speaking of our friend Bobby, one of the tension points, if you will, of all this, especially for Microsoft, because Microsoft has a really high-class culture, at least the way they like to think about it, right? They try to do the right thing, they try to be on the up and up, and then you have Activision, which is like the total opposite. They have a very negative outlook. It doesn't appear to be a great place to work, that sort of thing. And so Bobby is obviously the center of it. It is absolutely believed that once this acquisition closes, he will not be joining Microsoft. I have heard that from my own side, but it's also very public. And if you read the tea leaves of the announcements, he will remain CEO through the acquisition. That's not all that surprising, but it does not sound like once that acquisition is ended, that he will be onboarding over at Microsoft, because Microsoft knows they need to inject cultural change over into Activision. It's one of the reasons why they believe they got it on a quote unquote discount, is that Microsoft is going to have to change that culture. And so that is a big part of this conversation. So my understanding is that Bobby will not be moving on over to Microsoft. So just keep that in mind. All of this boils down to a big push from Microsoft on Game Pass. I've talked about on this channel multiple times that Microsoft can look at a calendar and look at how many studios they have and think about content release strategies. And they know, just like Netflix knows, just like Disney Plus knows, just like every other streaming service knows, you have to have an editorial calendar, as we would call it in the publishing world, of release content so that you can line up and keep your subscribers onboarded through the service. Remember, it's real easy to jump in and out of these things. And so Microsoft has announced that they are they're up to 25 million. Yes, that's 25 million Game Pass subscribers. It's honestly a little bit lower than I would have expected because I believe a year ago at this time, Microsoft was at 18 million, which means they've added about 7 million subscribers in a year. And so they're probably doing some math and saying, look at the Bethesda content, look how that's playing out, look how the growth we've seen. If we go to Activision, we can probably, extrapolate out X amount of growth. And so what Microsoft has very clearly done is said, look, with the studios we have, this is the release cadence we can get for quad A titles or AAA or quad A titles. If we onboard Activision, we can get into X type of release cadence and probably more than likely release games potentially more in the spring. I've talked about before how Microsoft likes to release games in the fall, but with Activision, they'd have so many titles, especially Call of Duty, which comes out every fall, brand new version, then they can have a little bit more flexibility to release things in the spring to help keep those Game Pass subscriptions up. That is where Microsoft wants people to join the Xbox family, is through Xbox Game Pass. And so it's going to be very interesting to watch over the next several years the editorial calendar and release cadence for both of these companies as Microsoft and Activision likely come together, and see how frequently they're going to be able to drop these big name titles, because that is going to be the ultimate driver of Game Pass growth. Now, when are they going to be coming together? This is a massive question because Microsoft is a $1 trillion company, one of the very few on the planet. And when they go out and say, hey, look, we're going to buy our way to success in an industry, that typically throws up some red flags, especially when it comes to regulatory concerns. I absolutely expect that Microsoft is going to be put under the serious spotlight, not only here in the US, in the EU, and other places around the globe about this acquisition. And so they're probably going to have to make some concessions, meaning they're either going to have to agree to keep shipping games on competing platforms or other things. Hilariously, they might be forced to make Game Pass available on PlayStation 5, which they would happily do today if Sony would let them. Or maybe even the Switch. I know a lot of people want it on the Switch. Either way, I think that is going to be a given, is that Microsoft is going to have to make some concessions. We don't quite know what they will be, and that is why Microsoft is saying it's going to be 18 months to get through all of these concerns. But the question is, can they get through all these concerns? I am not a lawyer in this regard, but I think they might be able to navigate this. Just bear with me here for a second. First off, in the gaming industry alone, Microsoft is not the largest console maker. We already know that is Sony. Sony outsells Microsoft's consoles. In the gaming space as a whole, there are larger studios out there. Microsoft is not in a dominant position in the gaming industry. Now, that is totally different than the rest of the company, but typically when it comes to a monopoly concern, Microsoft would have to be in a dominant position and own the market, which they don't. I mean, Sony and Nintendo handily make money. And then you have to look at the other gaming companies. Look at a company like Tencent, which is massive. So the gaming industry is actually pretty robust. Granted, the high-end local console, meaning like devices like Xbox and PlayStation, is pretty small, but the gaming industry as a whole is massive. The biggest concern I think that's going to be pushing against Microsoft is the fact that they're just so big in general, in that are they truly just buying their way to success? If that is the narrative that comes out, that could be unfavorably looked upon. But I don't think this is such a big, it is a big acquisition, but I don't think this is such a big flag as creating a monopoly within the industry, as some people on Twitter like to just shout. That being said, we'll let this one play through the courts, because it is absolutely, I would fully expect companies like Valve to have a lot of contention. You can imagine now with Microsoft, with all of these titles, especially the Call of Duties, all of these things out there, they could very easily create, to say, hey, look, we're not going to put our games in Valve anymore. And then that would create huge turmoil for Valve, because obviously all these titles bring in a ton of revenue, and Microsoft would have the capacity, in my opinion, to create their own game shop and just avoid all those fees. There's also one other regulatory area that we haven't even talked about yet: mobile gaming. Microsoft is really, really liked in the mobile gaming segment, and by buying Activision, they get King, which has a huge mobile presence. We know how popular things like Call of Duty Mobile are, but Microsoft as a company today is not anything close to a dominant player in the mobile segment. They don't even have a mobile phone platform of their own, right? Windows Phone is gone, and they don't have, I don't even know if they have any dedicated mobile games. They obviously have Xbox Game Pass on phones, but that is far different from games and apps in the iOS and Android app store. So I think that definitely plays towards Microsoft's advantage, which really just kind of boils down to this. I think Microsoft will be able to get this through regulatory concern. I think they're definitely going to have some concessions. I think we have a lot to learn about how things are going to shake out here in the next few months. The one point I absolutely want to drive home for everybody who's made it to the end of this video is that Microsoft cannot make any binding decisions for Activision until this deal closed. They have now signed, I'm assuming, a letter of intent or whatever the agreement is to get the ball rolling, but Microsoft is not in control of any Activision statements and control of any Activision decisions. They are independent companies and they have to remain that way all the way up until probably June of 2023, which means if you see Activision do something that is not a reflection of Microsoft, they have no control and they can't legally tell Activision what to do because they don't own the company. And the reason why that is then Microsoft would be liable because like, hey, look, you screwed up this company. The deal falls apart, which by the way, I believe it's a $3 billion check Microsoft will own Activision if the deal does not go through. And so this deal, considering that Microsoft put $3 billion down, as escrow effectively for this deal to go through, realistically means that they think this is going to go through. But either way, Microsoft cannot control what Activision is doing. They are separate entities all the way up until June of 2023. And if you want to stay updated about everything that's happening with this Activision acquisition, if you will, keep it subscribed here because I'm really freaking excited about this.